I hope you had an enjoyable networking break. We are now continuing with our session that has also a long tradition at this event because it focuses on industry issues. It is entirely prepared by SGE, and this year we are looking at opportunities in infrastructure. It is my pleasure to welcome to this panel Fulvio Besseghini, member of the Executive Board and Regional Manager South America at Lombardi, Philipp Morger, Director Industrial Programs at SGE, Olivier Narbey, Global Head Water Network Performance at Georg Fischer Piping Systems, and the moderator of this session, Bruno Aloi, Senior Consultant South America at SGE. Welcome them with a round of applause, please.
Tatjana again for the hospitality here. Our panel is going to be a little bit different from the previous panels because we think that it is important also this peer-to-peer learning. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the experiences of these companies in Latin America because we believe that it is important for you to hear from your peers what the experiences they had. And we're going to talk a little bit about the opportunities in this sector, which is one of the focus sectors of SGE, and one of the focus sectors that people are talking here about also, which is important for Latin America. I would start by asking the companies, so this is a question for Olivier and also for Fulvio, a little bit to make an introduction about your company business and your footprint in Latin America. So everybody understand where is your stand there. Please.
I can start. Okay. So thank you, Bruno. Thank you, SG and Swiss Charm for the invitation. So I represent here Lombardi. Lombardi is a Swiss-based company. We deliver and we provide services for engineering for large infrastructures, mainly dedicated in the domain of transport, water management, and also renewable energies. We have presence in 13 countries at the moment, and in Latin America we have offices or branches in Guatemala, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. I personally spent more or less 10 years in different countries in our business in Latin America.
I'm Olivier. I'm part of a company called GF Piping Systems, part of a group called Georg Fischer AG. We are present globally in, I'd say, more than 50 countries. Our activity at GF Piping Systems is to manufacture piping components, from fittings to valves to pipes, to serve all sorts of industries, from water utilities, gas utilities, but that can also go to data centers, microelectronics, mining industry. So any activity that requires pipes and fittings, we are capable of serving it. So just to give you numbers and our idea of our footprint in Latin America, globally we have a turnover of about 2 billion Swiss francs. Latin America, I cannot disclose the figures, but we are operating with about 350 employees, mainly out of Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and to a certain extent Colombia. And we are producing a very small part of our products in Latin America, in Brazil actually. Otherwise, for us, Latin American market is a market where we export from our various global manufacturing footprint.
Okay. And Philipp, can you tell us a little bit more about the mandate of SGE that you work on?
Yes, pleasure to do that. Herr Velor previously mentioned it quickly, that there is this mandate for large infrastructure and the so-called Team Switzerland infrastructure. So the idea behind is that we put together the strength of different organizations, for example, from the government, but also from the Swiss Export Risk Insurance and industry associations, such as Swissmem, Swiss Rail, and Swiss Inn. Put the strength together, put the know-how together, and try to make large infrastructure projects all around the globe better accessible for Swiss companies. That's our goal. We have different measures how we do that. For some of them, Switzerland Global Enterprise is responsible. some of them other partners within the Team Switzerland. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here and share also a little bit more insights about how this mandate is working.
Yeah, I mean, Heather said that Switzerland does not do industrial policy, but then why in infrastructure did the government did this kind of mandate? Why infrastructure?
Yeah, that's, I think, a very important question. And I would say there are different aspects why infrastructure was chosen or why Switzerland is getting active there. One of them is the pure growth which you see all around the globe. Already before the pandemic, there were a lot of investment programs from the States into infrastructure. The pandemic or the post-pandemic situation even boosted that more, so that the States saw that there's a possibility to support their home markets with investing in infrastructure projects. So there is growth in that field, also triggered by other developments like growth in population, people moving from the countryside to the city. So there's a lot of things which boost this growth. Also the need to make the infrastructure more reliable or more professional in certain countries. So that's one thing. And of course, where there is growth, there's a lot of players coming into the field. So when the cake is getting bigger, more get the appetite for having a slice of the cake. And it was already quickly mentioned, one country in the previous session, some countries are very, very active trying to support their companies in getting into those projects. Switzerland has there more a decent approach, but we realized Switzerland also has to do something that we can also a bit influence those infrastructure projects, because we have a huge knowledge in Switzerland how to do large projects. We have very good references where the projects were done in time, in budget, so things which you rarely combine together with large infrastructure projects. So there's a big know-how among the Swiss industries, two of them represented here. So we also have something to bring into the game. And last but not least, I think it's also important to see the, let's call it the market for large infrastructure projects is also working different to other markets. You cannot compare it to selling food, for example, abroad. It's different. It often involves governmental organizations or even the administration. Mostly it's tenders are involved. And the earlier you can identify such a tender, the more you have the chance to influence a little bit, to influence it in a direction which could be in favor for your own companies. And that's what we try to catch up a little bit.
And there's a question for the companies here. What motivated your company to enter in Latin America? How you see this market? How you see, what are the main opportunities that you have, Fulvio, there?
Yeah, well, let's say that Lombardi has been working in the international market since its foundation in the 60s, more or less. So we are not new to the international market. But 15 years ago, we started a geographical expansion, like a proper one. So our approach was still, let's say, project related. I mean, we enter a market once we have a project, once we have a contract signed. But at that time, we started to investigate a bit more the market, and then to study the opportunities in our core business and establish local staff. By doing this, I have to say that we have been able to take very, very soon relevant projects. I mean, we have been working relevant projects, and I agree 100% with Philipp that large infrastructure is not an easy market, and is not an easy way to find big relevant projects. So we started with this approach, and when we have seen interesting opportunities, we stay in those countries. That was the case of Peru, for example, or Ecuador, or Chile a bit later. So main opportunities in our field for an engineering company is of course the infrastructure gap that we already know in Latin America. And this is a huge opportunities also for technology transfer, but also renewable energy. It's a huge opportunity for engineering companies and for Swiss companies in general. And I also will say water management, which is a strong need. I mean, I was personally involved in the Lima water supply project. That was a very challenging one. But more or less, those are, I mean, in my opinion.
Did it help the fact that you come from the Alps and you're operating there in the Andes as well, or? Did it help the fact that you come from the Alps and you operate in the Andes, or?
That's a point. I mean, it was very interesting also to compare the different geology and the different mountains, like say. But actually, yes, it helped very, very, very much because we were, let's say, very open also to face, I don't know, different geography, different morphology, and so on. And that was actually a very, very interesting point.
And Olivier, on top of all of this that Fulvio told us, you also incorporated a company in Brazil, right?
Yes. How
was this experience?
We've been present in Brazil for a bit more than 20 years. So it's not a market we recently discovered, but we've been present, as I was saying, with more of an export business from Switzerland, Europe, US into Brazil. And that involved us in many infrastructure projects, mostly in the city of São Paulo, in water supply and in gas distribution, in gas supply. That was enough to get us some experience to be able to better understand the market, understand the risk in this market, and understand also the dynamic in the market, because they are not as stable as the Swiss or the European market. There are ups and downs that you need to cope with, and that helped us, feel that kind of trend. But the mega trends that you mentioned, urbanization, those are very, very solid trends. They might have lows and downs, but we are really convinced that they are winning, and they enable also other opportunities a bit beyond the infrastructure. I think mining industry was mentioned for Chile, for instance, and for us that became a key topic for lithium extraction. There are a lot of pipes that are needed for this, and that really makes the Latin American market very strong. The logical step, if you really want to grow, if you really want to become a relevant player, is to say, hey, okay, we can export, we have technology, we could do technology transfer, but every now and then we get requests from our customers, questions, is this made in Brazil? And it's many things at the same time. It's national pride, okay, that the people would rather buy something that is produced in Brazil, but it's also the fact that if you sell something that is a bit complex, as a component, a valve, a machinery, if it's made in Brazil, it also means it can be easily serviced in Brazil. And to show that you can actually source your product in the country makes quite a big difference and makes quite a winning argument. Taxes, import duties, of course, plays a significant role in that market. So, if you can produce locally. For sustainability reason, if you make pipe anywhere else than in the country where you are installing them, you're just moving air when you move pipe from one continent to another, so that's not really smart and not really friendly for the environment.
And from the quality perspective, were you able to keep the Swiss quality producing there, or?
Brazil is a very big country. Sorry for the triviality of this, but Brazil is a very big country with very, very different ways of working depending where you go and who you talk to. You can find some very high quality industry in Brazil. Sorry again for the triviality of this, but Brazil, they produce airplanes. There are not many countries in the world that can produce airplanes with that kind of quality. And at the same time, I've been faced in projects in Brazil where the components that are used, the technology that are used, they wouldn't even be acceptable in Europe in the 60s or the 70s. And you're faced with this kind of complexity. So when you decide to invest, you need to be extremely picky in what you are investing into and who are the people you are investing into. The people are very important. The quality of the education in Brazil is absolutely fantastic, especially when it comes to infrastructure. You meet a lot of young people in the companies that are very eager to learn, so it's extremely dynamic. So, you can maintain good quality, but you really need to be picky about your target and what you invest into.
Okay. And Philipp, why did SG choose Latin America? What do you see as a potential for the region?
Yeah, basically, back in 2017, I was on honeymoon in Chile, Bolivia, and Peru.
There's always love involved. Yeah, there's always love involved.
I liked it so much, so I needed to find a reason why to get back there. No, there are many reasons to get back there, and I have to say that was not the reason why we were choosing LATCAM. I was also not involved in the decision making because I just joined the mandate last December. But there was a clear decision process how we choose the total of 6 regions where we are active. One of them was clearly like, where do we see the willingness to invest into sustainability and into infrastructure? Because sustainability, we heard it before, is quite essential, and it's a good trigger for Swiss companies, as we have a lot of know-how there. So we saw that this is important, which countries want to improve their infrastructure in a sustainable way. We also needed to check in which sectors are the countries planning to invest, because Switzerland is in a lot of sectors strong, but not everywhere. And Fulvio just mentioned some sectors where they are active, like energy or mobility. That's definitely 2 sectors where we are strong in, but also water and waste management is something. So we also checked where is the need in those fields, because that would be a good match to the Swiss companies. And I think with LATCAM also very interesting is the fact that in several countries you have quite a strong involvement of the private sector, meaning through public-private partnerships, for example. And often when you have the private sector involved, there is a bigger attention on the total costs of a project. And when you say costs and Swiss solutions, yeah, you often, in the beginning, you see that Swiss solutions are a bit more expensive, but when you see it in the long run, it can lead to lower operational costs. And as well, and that's a very big, I would say, USP, which our mandate has, we can bring in SURF, the risk insurance. They can guarantee the financing, and this can lead to a AAA rating for the financing of the project. And then suddenly you have quite interesting total costs of a project. And that was something which was also quite important for us to evaluate. And then last but not least, we saw, and Simone mentioned it in her speech, already with the general SG mandate, there was an increasing demand for LATCAM. So LATCAM was already on the radar for a lot of companies. And of course, we should try to get active there where the companies also want to go. Because in the end, even if we identify the most interesting project, but it's an area where companies say it's too challenging to start, or they're not seeing the long-term perspective. So then it would be wrong if we identify such a market. And you can also always check numbers for the different markets, like which market is investing how much. When we see, like for Latin America, don't want to mention a specific number, but they are in the trillion area. So it's huge numbers which should be invested in the future. And yeah, of course, we saw that this is a huge demand. And maybe the last point to add here, a huge demand is nice, but it's an issue when you don't get into that project. So you also need help, probably. And we thought, okay, it's also quite important that we focus on a market where we maybe also can provide help for the Swiss companies, that it's easier to get into the projects.
Talking about this demand, it's always, people always talk about the infrastructure gap in Latin America. I don't like this word gap. I prefer to see it as an opportunity for the Swiss companies. Yeah, my boss is here. So, and how, I mean, now a question for the companies. How do you perceive, how the Swiss technology is perceived on the ground? Is it perceived as something that can really empower communities to development and sustainability? Do you have like concrete cases where you can show us that? Maybe Fulvio?
Well, I think that Swiss technologies is really perceived as a good one with a high standard of reliability, most of all, and also high level of development. Most than help, I will say that we can, let's say, work together with this the huge development that is ongoing, just to closing this, let's say, gap in infrastructures. What we can say, there are a lot of opportunities there. Again, large infrastructures, renewable energy, and so on. How we can help in this? Of course, the large experience that Swiss companies had in the past. For example, if I think of big, huge projects we developed here, like both the Gotthard from the tunneling in the Gotthard, or renewable energy in the solar plant, or also hydropower. It's a huge experience that could be bring to Latin America, and it's very accepted. Also because Swiss companies has a long history in Latin America, from mining sector to energy and electrical distribution. So actually, Swiss label is very good perceived. Of course, it's also something that we have to consider as a responsibility, because as a Swiss company, also the level of demand is usually high. How we manage it? Well, we had also let's say, we were quite lucky, because entering in a specific and a huge project, we are not selling a product or a commodity. We are selling like a tailor-made service. So we were, since the beginning, very close, very in touch with the client. So also this attitude to share the ideas with the client and to develop something together with. And also trying to respect budget, for example, which is actually very important in Latin America, because we usually to have much less than what we are expecting for doing an European standard level. So just to be able also to innovate in this way, to maintain cost under a certain level, but also maintaining the quality. So that was more or less the approach that, as a Swiss company, I think we should have, and we had as Lombardi.
Olivier, how Georg Fischer can help? Sustainability there? And it's a big problem in like water leakage and sanitation there.
Yeah. When you are a supplier to this kind of industry, whether it's gas or water, you are responsible to provide a technology that ensures efficiency along the distribution process. So not to talk specifically about pipes, but this is my work, so you get the answer about pipes. But every joint on the pipe, and there can be many, is a potential for a leak if it's not executed properly. So where we specialize is to explain that, what is really important, what is the real added value in a piping system, is how you're going to connect everything together, and all these nodes in the system, how you're going to operate them. And that's where the relatively small quantity of components and parts come as a very big value, technical value into a project. You have millions of kilometers of pipe in any country, millions of nodes, but the value of the nodes is about 20% of the pipe. So it's extremely important, and to get this message through goes through a very good, very strong technical support, technical education with our customers. It also goes along, and that's where we are also very opportunistic. A lot of the companies with whom we started business in Mexico or in Brazil were actually driven by, for instance, in Mexico, we worked a lot in the gas distribution by international companies. So Gas Natural, Spanish company, brought their specification from Europe. Those specifications were the results of probably decades of development with industry players like us. And when they reached Mexico, it's also true for Gaz de France, they implemented their specification, and the level of quality that was required from that market was the one we could deliver and we could bring. Similarly, in a water project in São Paulo, funded by JICA, Japan International Corporation, they would take plastic pipe fittings and a certain way of jointing pipes that we created with them, we created with the engineers and the consulting engineers. And when the funding is strongly linked to a technology choice, that's where we have a much easier game to play, because otherwise you are just faced with a price competition, no movement, no dynamic towards better quality. And you end up with less durable products, less resistant, less resilient infrastructure, and that's where things collapse.
So an important point will be also to influence the specifications in that case.
That's our everyday work. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's, I would say, impossible. There's just no way in certain economic condition where you can sell the quality because it's just not possible. I would say it's getting much easier now, for instance, in Brazil, because we are facing some players, especially in the public-private partnership world, that have invested literally billions in auctions to get the right to operate the water system of Rio, for instance. And they have put so much money in there for such a long period. I think the water concession for Rio is about 35 years. They cannot go for a half-baked technical solution. They cannot go for something that might work for 10 or 15 years, and then we will see. It's in their best interest to invest for the extra 20, 30%, maybe more, to get something that will be long-lasting beyond even their concession duration. That's also very favorable to us because we have a totally different discussion that is not just price-based, but just like you put it, total cost of ownership-based, financing also can play a role. So that's really a game changer for us in the Brazilian market.
Yeah, it brings us to another subject that we discussed a little bit before, which is the big elephant in the room, which is also how in your infrastructure business you get in contact with a lot of public actors, yeah. And how is this relationship in Latin America, where we know that there is a history of corruption? How do you two companies deal with that? How do you deal with that? Trying to influence the specification, but at the same time doing it in a clean way.
I think due to our history, and I would say very clean operation over the past 20 years, we are not confronted with this on a daily basis. Like we don't have any solicitation, actively or permanently, and that's maybe mostly due to our history and our behavior in the market. We just had local team that run this very clean operation. So we are not very confronted with this very often, to be frank. When we have the challenge of integrating an acquisition and a company, and that we have some local practice that come into our company, we need to be extra careful to make sure everything stays aligned. So we are in this process now. Again, we haven't faced any similar issue. But again, if you go to the public, badly funded companies, it's going to be about price. You also know it's going to be about some extra secret ingredients that you don't want to hear about. So you basically avoid this kind of customers, not because you've been confronted to it, but because you have no way to play it fair. So it's just a selection. And again, to make it about Brazil, sorry, I don't know many other markets in Latin America. The country has so many needs and companies and cities that are building and upgrading their infrastructure. So, you can turn every direction, north, west, east. You can find an appropriate target and business partner to develop your business. There's always a way. There's always a way.
Which you don't have to compete with price as well.
Yeah, it's always there. We're talking public infrastructure, but to different degrees.
And how did Lombardi deal with that?
Let's say for our kind of services that we deliver, of course, we had a lot to do with the public sector. I mean, the most important challenge is bureaucracy, in my opinion, because we are facing usually large processes, a long time, long waiting time, and that's also impacting our business. Also, probably the point is that political situation will affect also the business, which is not the case, for example, in Switzerland or in Europe in general. This is something that we learn to face and to manage. Regarding the corruption, I will say also that you can find a way to work properly without reducing this risk. We put in place some specific policies like we don't meet any public functionary alone. We never invite someone in our office. We have country managers that are not citizens of the country they are managing, and so on. They are just politics, you know, to try to control and to disrupt a bit this personal relationship that sometimes could generate problems also for them, not only for the company. I mean, it's very important to find the right way, but it's possible. I mean, there is this possibility, and it takes time. We have to be patient in those markets. And of course, we have to say also that no, not all the countries in Latin America are the same and are facing the same attitude. I mean, just to say Chile, for example, I mean, Chile, in my opinion, this problem doesn't exist at all.
Philipp, we didn't forget about you. So, no worries. Let us. What is the concrete support that SG can give you? Can give the Swiss companies on ground with your program?
Yeah, I maybe would like to extend it a little bit, like to the whole team Switzerland, where SG is one part of it. I guess one key element which we have is identifying the right projects abroad. As I mentioned a bit earlier, like projects in an early stage, which are not yet tendered, identify those and see how can we make sure that Swiss companies get into the race for such a project. Maybe are there possibilities where we can launch or support feasibility studies, which are a good ground then for a later tender. So identifying those projects, because we heard from both companies just before, like that it's a challenge that not every project is interesting for the Swiss companies, and there are so many out there. So that's one thing which we do. But not only like identifying them, we also try to understand how is the setup there? Could it be in favor for Swiss companies or not? Where do we see hurdles for the company? So that's one thing which we do, and trying to provide those projects to the right Swiss companies. There are the associations coming into the game, which I mentioned that they are part of Team Switzerland as well, because they know their members well. So there we try to connect with the associations so that we put the interesting project together with the right companies. It's one thing which we do. Here we are supported by a digital platform where you can check those projects. That's something which I also could recommend to the companies to set there your alerts for the markets where you're interested. Then I think the second quite key thing is the network. We heard it before already. Infrastructure is also a people business. It's also about knowing the right people, getting the information. As I now a few times mentioned, getting the information early. So that's something where we can help. And then I think one of the key elements is also the local setup which you need. Olivier mentioned they have a company in Brazil. The question often rises, is that needed? Is it helpful to have, or what different setups could be interesting? There our local team can help. We saw it in the beginning in the presentation. We have in Chile and in Brazil and in Mexico we have a Swiss Business Hub. They can help, and in the other markets we have the collaboration with the chambers who can help understanding, okay, which setup could be right for the Swiss company. What we can also facilitate is what we basically do today is experience sharing. Sometimes it's interesting to getting to know a local Swiss company who is already in the market and maybe already has learned how is it working or what are challenges which are coming up, so we can help putting the people together. And even for those companies who are well established in a market, suddenly new questions are rising, new legislations, new rules. So there we also can help the Swiss companies who are already locally based to understand those new situations. And last but not least, we were talking a few times about money already. Some or quite a good amount of projects are financiated by development banks. We are in close contact with the Inter-American Development Bank. My colleague Christian, who is sitting back there, he's the key person in our team who is talking regularly with the Inter-American Development Bank to see what is coming up there for projects, how are they structured, and to make sure that those projects also get easier accessible for Swiss companies. So that's a bit in summary how we can support.
Can I rebound on that?
Yes, please. Yes.
No, talking about Inter-American Development Bank, something very interesting that is developed by them is for the water sector in Brazil. They are funding some technical workshop, technology workshop, where we have like a 20-minute, 30-minute window where we can develop a technology, a project to a broad audience of water utilities. It was in Brazil. We did it also for, I think, in Mexico. And it gives us an opportunity very quickly to a broad audience.
Present technology.
Present a technology, and I think that's quite useful. I'm not sure that SG could do something similar, but that's something very interesting, very intense. For us, it proved useful. We got us 3 very good accounts in Brazil and 1 in Mexico.
Take note of that, Philipp,
Great.
please.
Great to hear.
I will pass. There's one question I always ask the companies when we do this kind of seminars. It's what are the do's and don'ts? What can you recommend to your fellow companies here when entering Latin America? You two are good, successful companies now. Fulvio.
What to do? Probably. First point, I think we have to approach in a respectful way the culture. I mean, we used to, and that was one of our first errors probably, or lesson learned. So be very respectful and try to understand how is the cultural background and the way to do business there. And then try to understand and learn quickly how the framework, the law framework works, because that's the key for doing properly things. And probably having also a very good corporate social responsibility will help a lot in present as a good company, as a right one. Why don't think that one size fits all. In Guatemala and Chile are different of Uruguay, Brazil, and Bolivia. I mean, there is a huge difference between one country and another, and that's very interesting. And finally, probably don't underestimate the political impact on the project, on the business, because they can change a lot, the way in which this is developing, and also a change in politics can stop a project, can start another one. You have to be very smart and quick and understand the situation and try to move your stuff also and react properly. That's. I mean, it's really a field of instability, as the CEO said before, but also it's an opportunity to learn how to be really quick and smart in moving in this difficult ground. On the other hand, there is also huge opportunities that probably there are not still in Europe or in other markets.
Again, trivial, but speak the language.
I'm getting good point.
But there's a slight downside to this, which is the whole of LATAM for me. It's quite an enthusiastic environment. You are drawn into this. There are a lot of projects, a lot of activities. I just come back from 2 weeks business trip in Brazil. I am completely drained. There's just too much to do and too many things to focus on, and the ability to pick your targets, the ability to really point where you have really the best chance is really a key thing. And connected to the first point, if you don't really understand what is happening, if you don't speak the language, then you are, you don't have any criteria. You need very strong help, very strong, trustworthy local partners to do that. So it's always a mix. You don't even, I'm not a native Portuguese speaker. I speak, I understand, but there are still a little bit of finesse that you need help with. And believe me, from south, that from south to north of Brazil, that's not quite the same language to me. So
I come from the north of Brazil.
No, so save your breath, pick your targets. That's really don't spread over too many things. You just look. See, I was in front of the map of Brazil. That was in the office, and if you put it to the right scale, no, sorry. This is no comparison. It's so much bigger than Europe. So much bigger than Europe.
Is there anything that you guys would do differently? That's a tricky question. I'd love to do this.
It's a good one. Well, in our case, it was, like I said before, we started trying to rebuild another Swiss company in Latin America. That was exactly, let's say, it was not the right way, let's say, at least, because our, way to manage the time frame also with staff and with client was very pushing, and that was perceived as quite aggressive in some way. So we understand to manage time, to understand that we have to be patient, that there is a time for a decision from the public sector also, and we try to also switch our attention to reliability, to quality, and at the end of the day, those are the points that really you are asking for a Swiss company. And again, it's a matter of organization, but in another way around, if compared to our, let's say, usual way to do this. But at the end of the day, we have been able, let's say, to switch quickly to the change. But at the beginning, it was very, very tough.
I don't know what to answer to that question. I would waste your time.
Okay. So, Philipp, do you have any concrete recommendations for our people there in the ground? What you can recommend the companies in Latin America?
I would like to get back to the point which Fulvio mentioned about the cultural differences. So when you respect those cultural differences, you will quite soon realize that one of the best things which you can do is go to Peru and eat a lomo saltado. That's one of my favorite dishes. No, but seriously, even such complex topics like a large infrastructure project is highly influenced by cultural aspects, but also by the local framework, as you also mentioned, like the legal situation, the requirements there. So those need to be understood, and when you try to understand it in an early stage, you can avoid a lot of mistakes, which can get expensive or can cause problems. So understanding also what does this mean then for you as a Swiss company, so for the local setup which you need there. There I guess Bruno and Adriano, our two consultants for Latin America, they have a lot of experience like how such a setup should be. So there rather you should talk than I. But maybe one more advice I would say is use the network which is there. One possibility is the Team Switzerland now which is built up, but also other organizations who support you, because a door opener is never wrong in any market. And maybe one last advice, I would really say when it comes to tenders or preparation for tenders, price is always an issue. But as long as you can manage to guide the discussion to the total cost of a project, then I guess we have quite good cards in the game as Swiss companies, because Olivier also mentioned that then suddenly a project owner they know about the risks which they probably have in 15 years or 20 years. So that can lead to a very interesting discussion.
Now a very decolonial question, which will be, what can Swiss companies learn from Latin America? Because you come here and we talk a lot, but what can we learn from Latin America?
Well, let's say again about instability. I mean, at least our company is made mainly by our staff, the experience of our staff. So our engineers that have been working there, they were back like entrepreneurs, like able to face crisis, to face different situation, and to manage also multicultural situation, to work together with people with very different background. And today they are asking from people from Latin America. We have in the last month we mobilized and we relocated 5 people from Latin America, 3 in Australia, 1 in Switzerland, and 1 in Canada. I mean, there is this cross-functional and cross-country fertilization in some way, and we learn it in Latin America, of course. And another point that I personally learned in Latin America is about sustainability. I mean, sustainability is nothing new in Latin America. I agree 100% with someone that said it before here, because I mean, 15 years ago, the first project with the mining sector was asking for the sustainability report, and was quite impressive to me because it was something like, you know, like a paragraph that we used to put in some report that was not like a specific topic to be faced. And with the biodiversity that Latin America has, sustainability is a crucial point, and it has been a crucial point since many years ago. And we learn a lot how to manage sustainability also in our European project after the experience in Latin America. So it was, in my opinion, something really, really important.
Olivier?
Yeah, totally in line with the entrepreneurial spirit of these countries. Typical example, you know, we pride ourselves in GF that, you know, any piping application that you can think of, we already thought about it and we've done it. And when we acquired that company in Brazil, we found people who had thought of things that we hadn't. And, you know, we learned, you know, it's just to see how creative they are, how they look for efficiency. And I mean, we didn't have, it's a bit too soon to have that cross-fertilization that was mentioned by Fulvio, but I'm sure it's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to happen.
Do we have time for another question, or should we? Okay, just one last question now. Now it's your chance, you two. What would you like as a support from the government, from SGE, from the institutions?
I'll make notes.
Yeah, please. What would be helpful for you, Swiss companies, winning the ground in Latin America, that you think that's still missing?
Yeah, I entered the room a bit earlier, and free trade agreement was mentioned. You know, especially, I mean, Fulvio, they're more into engineering, you know, brain services, I would call. We sell quite a lot of commodities, so we are facing a local competition. You know, and yes, the quality can be justified, but sometimes the gap is extremely big. And in some markets, we're not able to play.
So a free trade agreement would be a game changer for you?
It would change a certain number of things, but, you know, free trade agreement with Switzerland also means free trade agreement with European Union. So maybe you are bridging the gap with the local competitors, but you're also bringing in a lot of new competitors. So, you know, it doesn't, you know, you need to be careful about that your fight is not just with the locals, it's also with what other people might, you know, join this market. So I don't think it's the solution to everything, honestly. I think we should still play our Swiss card and Swiss value and high value added. But, you know, in some markets that are very commoditized, this could help. I would say more communication platform. We talked about, you know, technical workshop and things like that. That is something that is efficient. What I've noticed, and that is true for all of Latin America, professional social media like LinkedIn are extremely strong. I think it's also due to the relatively young age of the population. Like, you know, if I post something, yeah, maybe I have 100 reactions on my best day. But any of the engineers of the company we work with, they post something, they have 2,000 reactions. It's just, you know, snowball, and that is extremely efficient way of communicating and doing things. So, you know, I don't know what sort of audience SGE has, what sort of platform we could use, but that could definitely be also very interesting. Just some additional ideas.
Thank you. Yeah. Fulvio?
Well, in our case, I will say there is no specific points that I will address. I will say that we have already a strong collaboration with SGE, for example, where we participate into many missions in Latin America and in many activities. Also with the embassy, for example, in the different countries, we are always in touch with the ambassador, the local ambassador. Here we have an ambassador that visited one of our site jobs also years ago. And we work also with the Chamber of Commerce in locally. So we participated to Perumin this year and so on. So I will say that the offer that we receive from entities, from Swiss entities, it's already very, very good. Sometimes we also have some needs in, you know, immigration stuff for people coming from outside the Schengen area and so on. But again, the answer is really very quickly and very efficient. So thank you again.
Do we have questions now? One question only, the boss said. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes, as Swiss companies, we have always a positioning of security, of course, reliability, and you talk about your business model dealing directly with the government in Latin America. So one of the fears over there in Latin America, currently in my country, I'm coming from Peru, for example, is if you deal with the government, I mean, it's very unpopular right now. So since you are so comfortable working with the government over there, it would be super good for everyone, not just for your company, and also for other industries as well, to show everybody, to talk about that, how you deal with government without any negativity around, using, for example, the channels that you mentioned about the communication, using your engineers, using the platforms, social platforms. Everything would be very positive for the whole community, not only for Peru, but all overseas in Latin America per se.
Who was the question?
It was just a comment. If you are planning to do something like that, it would be beneficial for everyone, also for the other stakeholders that deal with those type of entrepreneurs, since we in Switzerland have to deal with them at the same time.
Yeah, I think what is important when you mentioned also this this handling the government is also you have to also try to impose a technical view sometimes. So it's government is not popular. I mean, if you go always in the technical side, it's you escape the politics, yeah, somehow. When it's possible to escape in this case. Yeah. So, do we have time for another question? Please, Tatjana.
Okay,
please.
let's see.
Another one.
Last one.
Last one. Okay. Yes, please go.
Me?
Ahead. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
But you? Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. Christian, yeah.
Thank you. Really quickly, I was glad you mentioned the international finance institutions, and usually we think of them of providing financing to the governments, and then the governments do the procurement process and hire a contractor. But I know Lombardi has worked directly with the IFC, which is part of the World Bank group. So I was wondering if you could say what was particular about being a client directly of the IFC in the procurement, and what advantages you saw in them. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question. It was a very quick process, first of all, but very intensive. I mean, we had to deliver very strong documentation and support our skills, but it was very quick and very clear and were not asking, papers and papers, but just meaningful documents. And after that, they did some verification also with our partners and so on. So that was the first point. And after that, the contract also was very clear, 10 pages or something like that, and standard, and also, let's say, very fair if compared to other contracts in the local law. So those 2 points were exactly the best ones. And also the kickoff meeting and the starting process was not very quick, very easy, very straightforward to the point, without many processes or big histories behind the starting activities. So in our case, it was a very good experience, and from this one, we started also to work with other international finance institutions like the IDB or the World Bank.
Thank you. I mean, we have to finish now. Thanks a lot. We're going to be here for the cocktail, so you can always come and approach us there.
My friend, the last one.
Okay.
The last tips. Just, I'm from Chile. I'm a consultant of the GE. Some tips for the companies that wants to go to Latin America. First, let's say my colleague in Chile, no Spanish, no business. It's the first word, right? And find local partners. We have very important engineering in Chile, for example. And other thing that's important, that your process, your solutions, try to let them know. We're making, there in Chile with the Swiss Business Hub, we're making a job about solutions that are not known. We have here in Switzerland solutions that they don't know. For example, I'm working on a project to electromobilize mining trucks of 300 tons. And that's something that is for the first time that we're doing that. But to convince the miners to do that is very hard. But you have to make a big communication job with all new solutions, new technologies, and try to understand their needs. So your solution or your technology can be put it on and can be a solution for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Olivier. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I thank all our panelists for providing a well-rounded picture of how they evaluate opportunities in Latin America, summarizing their experience, give recommendations on do's and don'ts. I believe that was very interesting and helpful to many of you. Now, as Linda mentioned at the beginning, we are now changing to a completely different subject, and that too has become a tradition in our program. In 2023, artificial intelligence is no longer something abstract that we can forget about. It is a topic that raises questions, curiosity, fear, and hope all at once, regardless of whether you live in Switzerland, Europe, Asia, or the Americas. I'm thrilled to announce our next speaker, who is a global head financial services data-centric AI at Modulos AG, and will provide the right context when speaking about the new era for trustworthy AI. Please give a warm welcome to Elena Maran.
Let me check the clicker first. So, first thing first, good afternoon, everyone, and big thank you to the Latin American Chamber of Commerce for giving me the opportunity to stand here in front of this great audience. I'm also honored to speak after very amazing and high caliber speakers, but most importantly, to be the last thing standing between you and the Aperol Rich. So this is why I've chosen a topic that many of you will agree is the most interesting and exciting one, regulation. No, I'm just joking. We will talk about AI, but we will give it a different spin to understand what do companies need to do nowadays to produce AI that is trustworthy and it's in line with the new regulatory requirements. So if I had to do this presentation 1 year ago, it would have been probably quite different. We would have talked of what is artificial intelligence in general, what kind of transformative power it has to change business model, to generate new revenue streams, to introduce efficiencies in processes, and so on and so forth. But nowadays, with all the talking about ChatGPT, with all the news about artificial intelligence, I really doubt that anyone in this room does not know anything about AI and is not aware of the potential for AI in their business. And this is why the spin we're going to give to the chat today is how to develop AI applications that are trustworthy, that respect the new regulatory requirement and generate trust in consumers and investors. So many of you can think regulation is usually something that carves down innovation. But it's not necessarily the case. If you think that you can produce AI applications that do not discriminate, that are safe, that don't produce harms, ultimately you as a company are gaining the trust of your customers, are gaining the trust of your investor, and ultimately are generating trust in your products and in your services and in your decisions. So this is why we're choosing this topic today. And I want to borrow to remain on the exciting side of things, I want to borrow an analogy that our CEO used in a webinar a few weeks back, which is with a car. Many of us are excited when buying a new car, right? They want it to be shiny and fast and powerful, but they also want it to be safe. Your car is a highly regulated product. It has a lot of requirements about safety, about controls that make sure your car does not produce harm. So when purchasing a car, you're also doing some considerations about its safety and whether you can use it without producing harm. And it's not a good idea to drive a car in the street that doesn't pass these safety controls and it's not compliant with the regulation. The same goes about AI. It's not a good idea to put in the market a decision AI system which has a high impact on society or individual lives that is not compliant with our fundamental rights, which can create the harm of discrimination, and so on and so forth. So let's go to our agenda for today. First of all, we will explore what can go wrong when we talk about AI applications in general. What are the harms? What are the ethical considerations around AI? Second, we're going to explore the European AI Act, which is probably the most comprehensive effort globally to regulate the technology. We will explore what companies need to do to get ready to comply with this regulation. And finally, we're going to tackle one of the most complex topics, which is fairness and bias in artificial intelligence. Hopefully, at the end, we're going to have space for some questions. But if you don't get to ask your question, please come and see me at the Apéro Riche. I will be there and happy to take your questions. Or also add me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to connect with you. So I got the wrong direction, of course. So, about the potential harms of artificial intelligence, I'd like to show you a small passage from one of the MIT Review's publications that says, it's a wild west out there for artificial intelligence. AI applications are increasingly used to make important decisions about human life with little to no oversight or accountability. And it's true. This is one of the major concerns that our society has about artificial intelligence. The possibility of artificial intelligence to take and make critical decisions that impact our life, but with no one accounting for those decisions. And there are many cases that ended up in the press and to the public domain of decisions taken by AI that have gone wrong. Some of these cases even belong to famous companies or even to government. I want to quote some of them. For example, Amazon had put in production an algorithm to select candidates for job application that was highly discriminating women. Then some of the medical algorithms were failing to produce the right recommendation for people of color. The Dutch government fell because of an issue in the algorithm that was detecting tax fraud. It was discovered that this algorithm was discriminating people with a dual citizenship. And finally, when we use AI for predictive policing, we may end up jailing people just because of their race. So as you can see, it's fundamental and it's important to regulate AI to make sure that there is no harm or damage posed to specific group or individuals in particular. So what is in the UI Act? Generally speaking, this regulation that has been first drafted by Europe in April 2021, it is the most comprehensive effort to regulate AI on a global basis. It will serve as the GDPR for AI. And I'm not using this analogy just casually, but the intent is the same, is that of regulating the technology for any company, no matter where it's based, that will place their product or services into the European market. So a company operating in Latin America that wants to offer services that are supported by a decision algorithm that deals with European citizens will have to comply. A Swiss company that surely operates also in the rest of Europe will have to comply. So it's really something that we all need to be aware about because we'll have fundamental consequences in the way that we can exploit artificial intelligence and continue to reap the benefits of using the technology. What happens if we do not comply? Well, the penalties are quite severe. They can go up to 6% of the global turnover of a company, and have dramatic implications if we think, for example, of the SME ecosystem. 6% of the global turnover can send an SME to back home, let's say. This is not the first initiative to regulate the technology, but it's part of a suite of legislation with the same aim of protecting citizen fundamental rights from the use of the technology. So these are namely the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, and the AI Liability Directive. Let's give a general overview of what is this act about, what's in it, and the main points. So the AI Act takes a risk-based approach, a use case-based approach. It selects AI application according to their potential of posing a risk to the final users, which are, if you wish, the subjects of the decision made by an algorithm. It will pose in particular some specific legal requirements for those that are classified high-risk AI systems, which are the ones with the highest impact on individuals' life, on particular group, or the society as a whole. There is a strong emphasis on data and the quality of the data with which the algorithms are trained. Then, as I was saying, the scope is fundamentally to protect the fundamental rights of European citizens and to not expose them from the potential of discrimination. there will be a need of producing a wide range of documentation to support the adherence to this requirement. And finally, for this high-risk AI system, there will be the need of obtaining a stamp, a CE marking, just like, for example, a medical device, right? Let's go a bit deeper into some of these topics. So first, to the risk classification. We start from systems that are posing minimal or no risk. This could be, for example, a spam filter for your email. It doesn't impact anyone's life. It's not something we should really care about regulating. Then the second layer is medium risk application that are permitted but subject to transparency requirements. So you are obliged to notify people that a certain decision, a certain recommendation has been made using AI. And then we come to those high-risk systems for which the requirements that I mentioned around data quality, around representativeness of data, around the AI governance are the most stringent, which are systems that operate in sectors that have a critical impact of society. So we can think about training, vocational, about insurance, about access to fundamental services, all these applications that fundamentally can harm people that are withdrawn resources or on which some certain decision, like the extension of credit, may fall. This risk classification, as I was saying, is use case specific. And finally, at the top of the pyramid, we find applications that have been banned. So, for example, biometric identification or predictive policing, except some rare exception that will be evaluated on a case by case. The requirements, a bit more on those. So why there's so much emphasis on the data? If you understand a little bit about artificial intelligence, you will understand that going back to the car analogy, data are the fuel of AI. So an AI system can be only as good as the data that it's trained on. If this data are not accurate and are not a good representation of reality, your decision system will necessarily produce inaccurate answers and will necessarily have a potential detrimental impact on certain groups of individuals, especially those that are mostly unrepresented. Another important requirement is transparency. I'm sure you all heard about the term AI being a black box. According to the EU AI Act, people using AI will need to be able to justify why an AI system has taken a certain decision. So, for example, if I'm denied a loan at a bank and the decision has been taken by an AI system, I shall have the right to go back to the bank and ask to explain the decision, why the artificial intelligence has taken that specific decision about me being a bad lender, a bad creditor. And another point is around human oversight. AI shall complement human decision. It cannot substitute it. And they should always be vetted by humans. And finally, all the topic of robustness and cybersecurity applied to AI. So what can happen is that people inject malign data into an algorithm to make it respond to this data in an unwanted manner. Or it can happen that someone steals the data in the algorithm or steals the model. So also these controls are extremely important before put into production in European markets an AI algorithm. Finally, regarding the enforcement of all these rules, there's still not a lot of clarity who will be in charge for the enforcement of these rules. is subject to ongoing negotiation, but what we know is that the high-risk AI system will need, as I was mentioning before, this CE marking before you can put them in production, and you will need to register them. There will be the possibility for unannounced inspections on the regulator side, where you will need to show the supporting documentation that your AI system has been vetted against the requisites of the UI Act. And probably, given this regulation is quite principle level based, there will be other industry standards and more specific standards that will fill in the gaps of this regulation. I know you don't like the word gap, but effectively this is a generic framework and it will need to be integrated, but more specific, industry-specific regulations or directive that shed clarity on who does what are the specific measures that need to come in, etc. In particular, this is true about the concept of fairness that then we will explore more in detail. So the latest news about the UI Act, the plenary vote happened this month. There is a typo there. It was on June 14th, not on June 15th. Where there's been a strong agreement around the possibility of implementing this UI Act. The next step is this trilogue between the European Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. And after that, we imagine that the final approval and passing into law will happen before the end of the year. After that, there will be a period between 18 months and 2 years in which the companies will be able to change the way they produce AI to adapt to the requirement, the so-called grace period. But if you think 2 years, it's a lot, I can tell you it's definitely not a lot for all the amount of requirements and for all the technical complexity of many of the topics that are in the UI Act. And if you think of, for example, financial industry application, a typical bank that operates globally might have thousands of AI applications. For all of those, they will need to, first of all, classify them based on the risk that they pose and see which one of those are high-risk AI applications. So this is all about AI governance. And second of all, they will need to implement all the controls, all the changes required by the Act. So there's a lot of change management because probably the roles of assessing this type of requirements are not there yet. The normal way of producing AI make AI sitting mostly on technical teams, data science, etc., with little or no exchange with compliance, with risk management. And third of all, there are parts of the UI Act which are really complex from a technical standpoint, as I mentioned, for example, the topic of fairness. So by the end of the year, there will be the approval, as I said, so brace yourself because a lot of change will be needed. Giving you a bit of more global perspective, is the European Union alone in this effort? No, it's not. Actually, the European Union is also cooperating with the US in saying, okay, the UI Act is coming, but probably it's not even enough. We need to have companies being proactive and already adopt some code of conduct that regulates the way they produce AI. The United States also is very aware of the topic, but they took a bit of different approach from Europe. Being a common law country, they do not deem the necessity of producing another piece of legislation, but they focus rather on the enforcement. So the main and most important regulatory agency in the US, the Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, the Financial Services, and the Equal Opportunity Commission released a joint statement saying they will definitely enforce the regulation of AI to avoid the potential of discrimination by these systems. And also they published a blueprint for AI that is quite similar, let's say, to the at least in terms of principles, to the UI Act. So as you see, it's not an isolated effort. Regulators around the world are opening their eyes to the potential negative impacts and ethical implication of using artificial intelligence in critical business processes. So what do we need as a company to get ready? As I was mentioning before, it's not just about tweaking an algorithm or pressing a button and saying, now I'm compliant. No, there's a lot of transformation that is needed. First of all, transformation of your IT processes, change management and creation of new roles, separation of responsibility, because the person that designed the system cannot be the same person that assesses the system and audits the system. So many companies will need to clearly define and set these roles. The companies will need to ask themselves, am I in scope for the stricter requirement of the UI Act? Do I have high-risk AI systems across the AI application I operate in? It's important to do a gap analysis between the current state of your AI services and the new requirements. So as I was saying, data quality is the first and foremost most important thing to do. Second thing is the fairness audit, and then update your system to be ready. There are also considerations about insurance policies. So what do I need to do in order to ensure my AI products in this market? The cost of compliance have been estimated by different organization and consulting companies. In particular, here we bring a research done by Intellera Consulting, which is ex-PwC public sector. They estimated the cost for complying with the new regulation for SMEs in Italy to be between 230,000 and 4 million, depending on different business scenario. Other pieces of research estimates are pretty much aligned. So it's important that companies start to think whether to build internal solution or seek the support of professional companies to help them comply with the new regulation. So now, if I didn't bore you enough, we will deal with the topic of fairness, which is one of the requirements of the UI Act for high-risk AI system, and is specifically mentioned when the AI Act talks about data that are representative enough in order to avoid discrimination. We will do this going through a practical example of a typical use case of AI. So if I'm using artificial intelligence in a bank, in consumer lending, to decide whether to give or not a loan to an individual, I may be faced with a situation like this. So having a data set that looks like this, where most of my observations refer to male individual, and only a minor portion to female individual. Moreover, most of the male individuals in my samples are good payers, so they didn't default on their credit after it was disbursed, which is not true for women. Most of the women are bad credits, which have an history of default on their lending. This is just an example. I'm not saying it necessarily reflects reality. Actually, women have been demonstrated to be better payers than men, but just to give you an example. Then in this specific data set, there is also an imbalance in the distribution of credit risks, so defaulters versus non-defaulters, across age buckets, where the young population, and in particular within the female population, is also a bad payer. So if I'm faced with this data set and I'm saying I want to produce an AI application, a decision-making for credit that is fair towards women, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to start. I'm going to start disimbalance my data starting from the relative proportion of men and women, or am I going to start looking at the distribution of credit risk, good payers versus bad payers? Or am I going to look at the distribution of risk across age buckets? Well, it's really not an easy procedure. There's a lot of things that I need to evaluate in order to understand what is the correct mitigation strategy of the potential of this bias. But already making an analysis of my data, noticing these imbalances, give me a hint that this system is at risk for discriminating women. This is why the first important step for tackling fairness is data quality exploration. I need to look at my data, if there are particular errors that I can amend, if sensitive attributes like gender or race are correlated with the decision or with other features. There can be things like proxy features. I can imagine, okay, but why don't I just train an algorithm without including the information on gender? Then I will be fair, right? Not necessarily, because some other information that I will include in my decision-making encode the information that someone is a woman. So even if I excluded the gender, I risk to still discriminate women. Then I need to define, well, what is a sensitive attribute? Which of the groups that I'm dealing with are at risk of discrimination? Another important part is defining, but what does it mean to be fair? Do I need to give the equal opportunity to everyone of getting a loan at risk of sending the bank to bankruptcy because they cannot afford to give out loan to bad payers? Or do I need to make sure that the errors of the system are the same across the two groups? It's a decision that business, along with compliance, along with governance body, risk management body in a company need to make. And finally, what is the best technique to mitigate potential bias? So let's move to the next step. Let's explore in particular how we can start thinking about which is the right definition of fairness for my use case. And keep in mind, it will always be use case dependent. So let's go back to our credit use case. What can we say here? What is the potential for harm that a decision-making system granting a loan or not can produce? So if I'm a bad payer and I'm still be given a loan, so I'm a false positive in technical term, the worst that can happen to me is that I will default on this loan, and then my credit score will go consistently down, and I will not have access to future financial resources. But also, if I'm potentially a good payer and I'm denied a loan, my credit score will still go down to a lesser extent, but on the long term, the withdrawal of these financial resources will probably impede me to meet future financial obligation, creating a long-term feedback loop that will condition the composition of future data. So in this case, we've seen that both false positives, so instances where the model predicts that someone should be given a loan where it shouldn't, and false negative, instances where the algorithm predicts that someone shouldn't be given a loan, but in reality it would have paid, count towards the definition of what is fair. So the metric that we would use in this case is statistically called equalized odds. It doesn't matter for you to remember equalized odds, equal opportunity, or whatever. It's just an example to give you a way of thinking what should I look for to select the appropriate metrics. And then, of course, there's a series of ethical considerations that should align with the value of, the company that is owning the AI system. And finally, now it's the time. Now I know that the system discriminates. What do I do? How do I mitigate the risk? Well, there is a variety of strategies that you can use. Some of them involve the data. These are called pre-processing strategies, where you can, for example, use different thresholds for the risk level of women and the risk level of men in the decision whether or not to give a loan. Or you can potentially change the process to collect your data. Then there are some strategies that involve the model itself, called in-model processing. So for example, I can give inside the algorithm a different weight to female and male observation. And finally, there are some post-processing measures that change the decision after it has been made. All these strategies will have different implications for the performance and the profitability of the algorithm. So it's important to compare them and to choose the mitigation strategy that reaches my fairness objective, but still doesn't compromise too much the profitability of the application for my business. And with this, I open it to questions, and if no questions, the Aperol Riche. No, Tatjana, closing remarks.
What do you think, in which sectors and which industries will this kind of rules be applied first? I mean, where do you see is a major development in the industry for artificial intelligence?
The financial services is surely an industry that will be largely impacted, banking and insurance. Everything that has to deal with recruiting, no matter the industry you're in, because when you're choosing a candidate or you're choosing to promote or not an individual using AI, of course you are having an impact on groups of individuals or individuals in particular. Anything that has to deal with utilities and access to natural resources. Anything that has to deal with the provision of essential services. So these are the sectors that are mainly impacted by this regulation because of the risk-based approach. So most of these applications will fall into the high-risk AI system bucket and will need to go through all these requirements.
Would that also include health issues?
Of course, but health is already also regulated by other specific regulation, and medical devices are already mandatorily stamped for being introduced to the market. But something similar will apply to all other high-risk AI applications.
Thank you, Elena. My question is, would Switzerland potentially follow the EU Act? And what about Latin American countries? Can it be expected that they might follow the US Act, or maybe rather another one? And if yes, will they be, is it expected that they will have sort of at least 90% the same regulation? Because otherwise I foresee extreme complexities if not.
Absolutely. So Switzerland, just like they did for GDPR, is completely aligned with Europe. We're actually working with many organizations at the Swiss level and also the political level to make sure the same requirements of the UI Act, in particular in regards to bias and non-discrimination, are aligned. Regarding to Latin America, any Latin American company that also operates in Europe will have to comply to this act. So if they operate in different markets, it wouldn't make sense for them to apply a different measure, for example, when only dealing with the Latin American market or when also dealing with the European market. It will probably be the case that the AI Act will set the global golden standard for AI regulation globally. And even the United States, most of US banks, US multinational have a strong presence in Europe. So I think in terms of regulatory requirements, everyone will be aligned. And let's not forget that principles of trustworthy AI are good for a company, no matter the regulation. Of course, we all want to avoid a potential 6% fine, but also we need to understand that this will help us creating trust around our services and products. Yeah. Any other question? Yes?
Thank you very much. So first of all, compliments. I think you have empirical statistics background somewhere. If not, you would have not been able to explain it so easily. I think if you work right in finance, insurance sector, or health sector, I think this is becoming really relevant. And the question is, people who develop apps are not really people who master normally data. So as an SME, right, how do you manage that, right? You're not a big bank, you can't have statisticians and AI developers. So how can you deal with that as a small, medium enterprise?
Yeah, and this is a main issue that has been considered also in the political debate. So potentially small companies will need to rely on third parties to help them put in place AI systems that are trustworthy and reliable. Especially SME will need to rely a lot on external vendors to develop their AI applications and to also assess them. Will they be held accountable of the decision made by their AI systems? Yes, they will. So it's important, especially for SME, that they select the right vendors to tackle this topic. Do we still have time? No more questions? There is one.
With the US elections around the corner, is there something that AI can do to assure that we don't have problems like we had the interference of the Russians or whoever in whatever election, in the upcoming elections?
I wish, but I doubt AI has this power as well, also because things like predictive policing have been banned by the European AI Act. So no type of interference or even control can be given to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. This was a lot of food for thought before we weigh very carefully our actions with regard to AI. And I hope you, dear participants, could enjoy a very diverse program today with a lot of brilliant speakers. Thanks to each of them and their important contributions today, but also your presence and your support. This event could aspire to be a success, and I hope you will be happy and you will say, yes, it was a success. That's my wish. Once again, I'm thanking our patrons and SGE for their joint sponsorship of the Latin America Day, but above all, highlight also Credit Suisse, who despite difficult times made good on their promise to be our venue host today. I think this deserves another round of applause. And last but not least, I would like to thank my support team, Elena Natani Badrut, who handled registrations out of Lugano, Martina Lehmann, Silvia Lucero, Esther Olavarria, and Daniel Otero. Good job, team. And I'm now inviting all of you for the aperitif riche that's being served in the foyer. And I wish you a very enjoyable networking evening.
1 second.
Thank you.
Before we all move, we also have to thank Tatjana.